Presented by Bank of America, the Leadership Series, Transforming India, in association with CNBC TV 18.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Series, Transforming India, presented by Bank of America in association with CNBC TV 18. Today in this exclusive conversation, Investing in a New India, we aim to explore the dynamic landscape of India's economic and technological revolution, how the nation is harnessing its potential, steering towards unprecedented growth and attracting global interest. Joining us are two stalwarts shaping the global and Indian economic narrative. Bernard Mensah is President of International for Bank of America, whose insights into worldwide growth models, investment strategies are unparalleled. Nandan Nilekani needs no introduction. He's the visionary behind India's digital public infrastructure. Well, we're going to talk to them about what next for India and investing in the new India. Gentlemen, great to have both of you here. Thank you very much for your time. Nandan, let me start with you. How are we set up in terms of policy, in terms of just the sheer ambition? Because we're doing stuff now which we've not done in the past. Make in India is a big example of that, manufacturing in India. Do you think we're on the right track, which should propel us and continue to lead us towards this high growth rate for many years to come?
Oh, I think so. I think India is in a sweet spot and is capable of good growth for the next decade or two. And manufacturing is definitely taking off. Infrastructure is much better. Global geopolitics is making people create resilience and diversification of the supply chains. So I think India is well placed on the manufacturing. And at the same time, the whole services side continues to grow, and we're seeing huge expansion of that. And then I think the domestic markets with domestic money coming into the capital markets, creating a buoyant IPO world. So I think all in all, it's in a good place.
It's a boom time, absolute boom time last few years.
Yes, it is. And I think there are structural reasons for that. I mean, today, because of things like SIPs, we get $3 billion a month into the capital market. That's $36 billion a year. And there's not enough stock to absorb that, which leads to price inflation of stock or makes IPOs very popular. So I think, and that money flow is going to continue as Indians diversify their savings from historically real estate and gold to financial assets. So I think you're seeing a secular trend.
Bunny, what are your impressions about the India story? You've seen economic models around the world. How do you rate India and what it is doing here?
Very impressive, and Prashant, good to be here. It's my second visit in 3 or 4 months, and I suspect that in the coming years I'll be here a lot more. And so it's not just a cyclical trend. I think there's some interesting things about the Indian model, and an important piece of that is the digital public infrastructure, actually, that Nandan has put in place. So you're getting the growth of middle classes that are taking place over time. India's always got an incredible wealth of talent. And of course, in a nation of over 1 billion people, that talent needs to be spread as much as possible. But you've had that core that has been invested in over the years. The infrastructure is coming into place. But when you layer on that, the fact that we're in this hyper-technology world and India has put in place this digital public infrastructure, it's turbocharging, I think, the growth prospects. It's super impressive.
Do you think we stay on this path? What has been remarkable to many observers for the last 2 decades here in India is manufacturing. I mean, we'll talk about the digital public infrastructure, but manufacturing is one thing which has never really taken off in India, but it seems to be taking off now. So just wanted your thoughts here on manufacturing.
Well, I think the institutions are underpinning the longevity of India's growth. So the institutions, whether it's the court system, the legal system, and actually the electoral system as well. And the rest of the world was very impressed in its own way, whether different parties might have been or not in India with the electoral cycle. And I think those institutions will underpin a manufacturing growth. As Nandan suggested, the supply chains are shifting. We see that in our business. We cover a lot of multinational companies. We cover a lot of not just US companies doing business here, but other Asian and European companies doing. I was in Tokyo and Hong Kong end of last week. And there's a lot of focus on India as a manufacturing hub. So I think that there'll be challenges with that. China is still in the supply chain. There are basic commodities and chemicals that India will have to be able to operate on at scale. But at the end of the day, if you've got the skilled workforce and the institutions, so they're state by state. And very quickly, I will say that the states that are able to have a good relationship with manufacturing, which is by definition a long-term thing, will be the leads in India's manufacturing growth.
Just to complete the loop on this particular topic, with Mr. Trump sweeping America, do you think China plus one was a big buzzword here in India, has been for the last 5-6 years? Do you think that pace of supply chain diversification in favor of India will accelerate, or it'll slow down a little bit? What's your sense?
Look, I think supply chain resilience is something that, if I can put the geopolitics to one side for a minute, every company needs to think through, because whether it's because of COVID or whether it's for other reasons, I think everybody, regulatory reasons in my industry, which is highly regulated, every CEO or every senior management team is tasked by its shareholders to really shake the tree and say, what if, because so many things that have happened that we haven't really thought about. So to my mind, a lot of the resiliency actually traces itself back to then. But in terms of the cycle of trade policies, those cycles have been going on for decades, and they'll continue.
Nandan, you've really put in place, I mean, there's the physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure, the digital public infrastructure on which so much of innovation and sort of so many new businesses have sort of built their marketplaces on. What is your own assessment of what's the new thing in terms of digital public infra? And then I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on AI and how that will transform what we're doing here in India, and in what way. Where will we see the maximum impact?
Sure. Well, I think, the first phase of digital public infrastructure has been put in place. Aadhaar, 1.3 billion people use 80 million times a day. UPI, 18 billion transactions a month, 500 million users, 50 million merchants, account aggregator, FASTag. So the whole host of things, I think, in that's all been done, and that's contributing to a number of things for growth. But I see 2-3 big areas. One is, of course, AI. I'll just come back to the use, but AI will be a big use. Second is what we call as open networks, like ONDC, Namayatri, where you disaggregate commerce and allow many people to participate even better. And the third is something which I've just worked on a paper with Augustine called the Finternet, which is how do we use tokenization at scale to transform the financial sector. So these are some of the big things coming. But and also what's happening is the way we designed this DPI was different modules that could work with each other. So now we're seeing combinatorial innovation. For example, the reason why you have $3 billion of money coming into SIPs is because I can use UPI, autopay, and sort of set up a instruction to debit my account every week or every month or every day and put it into a mutual fund. And that's happening at scale. So I think a lot of what you're seeing now is a combination of these things coming together. And I think on AI, we see a lot of use cases. In the public sector, I see education, I see agriculture, and I see language, because India is very multilingual, and AI can be used to remove the language access. So if a farmer can speak to his phone using a WhatsApp bot in Hindi and get the latest farming information, then you have suddenly made information accessible to everybody. And finally, I think the principal concept of DPI is public innovation, public rails and private innovation.
Absolutely.
So it's designed for markets to operate. And the estimate is that the market value of companies created on top of DPI is in excess of $100 billion.
Absolutely.
So suddenly you have these 100,000 entrepreneurs in the country, you are all leveraging this. So this is creating a perfect storm of inclusive economic growth.
AI working with DPI.
Yeah.
I mean, is that?
We think that one is creating AI as a DPI. For example, I have supported the creation of Indian language AI as open source and open data. So we're creating the largest repository of Indian data in Indian languages, and that's available to anyone. So somebody can use it to train their models.
Sure.
So all that will accelerate deployment. Or the existing learning platform we have called Diksha can be amplified with AI. So there are a number of ways to think. So AI and DPI are complementary.
And Finternet, if you can just sort of give us a...
Finternet is really, you see, we have seen tokenization with cryptos and all that. But the real thing is how do we tokenize classical product, deposits and stock and so on. And Finternet is an architecture to tokenize all kinds of assets. And I think it's early days yet, but there's tremendous interest. I spoke to the central bank governors, I've spoken to many large firms, including Bank of America, and I think there's a lot of interest in applying it at scale.
And ONDC, Nandan, I mean,
ONDC is an example of open networks. And what they're
how
doing,
is that coming along? I mean, we've spoken
I think
about...
they're doing well. They're doing about 14 million transactions a month. And they should grow on that. And it requires a few big winners on that, which will happen. Everything, if you look at DPI, there's a long gestation period when things fall into place, and then there's a takeoff point.
Absolutely.
So that should happen soon.
We look forward to that. Bernie, I mean, any reflections on what Nandan said? And of course, I mean, your thoughts on how AI, what you've seen in other markets around the world, because the technology is fast evolving, application and use cases are fast evolving. What's the best use case, most use case, at scale use case that you see here in India, especially with regards to banking?
So one of the things with DPI that has impressed me the most and is not often talked about so much is that it takes out a lot of middlemen. And one of the things that I admired about Nandan and a few others is that they've actually made this technology or this concept available to other countries. And so I actually go around the world as a sort of salesman to the effort, saying, look at what's happened in India, because I think there's a lot of countries that would benefit, not just from the public rails, but there are many countries that are held back because there's a lot of middlemen that are rent seekers sitting in the middle of transactions that should be doing their job, whether it's by the government or somebody else. And with DPI, as far as I can tell, I'm not an actual user in India, but the concept allows payments to go directly to people, to individuals without middlemen. So I think that changes things a lot. And the other aspect that I've seen with it in India, the second part of your question, is when I was last year, I was with the CEO of one of the biggest banks, top 2, top 3 banks. And he talked about the changing nature of consumer behavior because of this. And as a financial services firm, as a banker, he's able to bank more, extend more credit, understand people's credit terms and usage, something that was very powerful in the US and something called FICO scores. And India now has its own system around that. But it's incredibly powerful because the transactions are digitized, there's a history of it, people care about what their credit rating is, and that allows for credit creation to take place in the economy, which allows for growth. So there are these very powerful second, third order effects that maybe they're very clear to everybody here, but I have observed them, and I think that those are sort of things that will accelerate growth. Nandan, we were taking UPI to other markets around the world as well, right? I mean, that was...
NPCI, which is the company that created UPI, and amazing company. It's probably a crown jewel of India's tech world, a non-profit company. They have set up a subsidiary called NPCI Global. And the goal of NPCI Global is to take UPI global, either acceptance network or cross-border like Singapore-India transactions, or actually implement UPI in those countries. And they have, I think they're in discussions with a few.
Nandan earlier talked about a value of about $100 billion having been created by businesses who are riding on the digital public infra rails. We're seeing the startups and sort of digital businesses really exploding in terms of taking off. What advice, Bernie, would you give these youngsters who are actually building businesses on top of some of the digital public infrastructure that Nandan talked about?
Yeah. I think that, Nandan probably has more experience with the real core sort of ground-up entrepreneurs. But as we see it, often the problem with entrepreneurs is the different needs at the different phases of growth. So technology is such a powerful catalyst. We saw earlier phases of that in the early 2000s when the internet first came on. And you've then had a wave, like Nandan says, it starts slowly and then it accelerates, where people are able to get their products to market and access markets because you're on the internet and there's a delivery system, so you can have a virtual store for perfumes or for cosmetics or something like that. So the capital needs at different parts of your growth are important. Having the right network is really important. Knowing who to call, when to get advice, because a lot of time entrepreneurs just haven't been there, but others who have can point the way. And then one other thing, and I'm sure there's many others, one of the other things I would say as well is just having the right team. Often when you start, you're doing it all, then you bring a partner on. But at different phases, it's really important to have the right sort of team members with the right skills in place to get you to the next level.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick commercial break here at this point, and we're going to come back, see you with both Bernie and Nandan in conversation on this special show.
Presented by Bank of America, the Leadership Series, Transforming India, in association with CNBC TV 18. presented by Bank of America, the Leadership Series, Transforming India, in association with CNBC TV 18.
Welcome back to the Leadership Series, Transforming India, presented by Bank of America in association with CNBC TV 18. We're in conversation with Nandan Nilekani and Bernard Mensah. Nandan, you mentor a lot of youngsters, and so many people come to you for advice and mentorship. What do you tell them? And what
I think very much what Bernie said. I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you not need to be a long distance runner. If you really want to build a great company, if you just want to flip, that's a different matter. But if you want to build a great company, it's a race. Corporate governance is very important. I think running companies in a way that have very high ethics and so on is very important. And we have seen a few startups getting into trouble because their governance was not good. And that sort of affects the whole industry. So I think that's very important. We at Infosys, as you know, set the standard for that, 30 years back. And then I think finally, when these companies go to public markets, they should realize that public markets is a different world, because public market shareholders are very can't handle negative surprises, and therefore being on the ball, being honest with them, delivering good results is very important. And that transition from private to public, in some sense, is the coming of age that they will have to deal with.
I want to just go back to the AI question once.
Yeah.
Do you think AI, and you must be seeing a lot of businesses in that domain being set up, but as a society, as an economy, as a country which needs lots of job creation over the next decade, 2 decades, for many decades, is AI net positive or net negative? It's a question which keeps coming back, and who better than...
Well, it's how you use it. If you think of AI as labor substitution, then obviously there's a job issue. But if you think of AI as human amplification, where human talent and potential is amplified, then it's positive. I mean, for example, if you use AI to improve the reading and writing skills of 200 million children, then they will get better jobs. Or if you use AI to make the farmer productivity go up, he will earn more money and then invest and so on. So I think we have to think of AI as a way of improving society, not necessarily as just as a removal of jobs.
Okay. Bernie, we spoke about the digital public infrastructure which Nandan and others have set up here, and Nandan, of course, spearheaded. What are some of the innovations that you have seen in other markets around the world where you've been, which can be sort of applied and used here in the Indian context? Tell us.
Gosh, because India is so unique in its own way, and how it's growing. And I think one of the great things is just the homegrown solutions that are coming up in India. A lot of the innovation in the US and a little bit in Europe, more in the US around technology is something that's being imported here, and it's allowing India to leapfrog in a way. And I think that's the exciting thing about the possibilities for growth. If India is going back to manufacturing, I think if India is looking at manufacturing at scale, then there are obviously countries that have done that really at scale, really thinking through the supply chain. And India does have quite a few industrialists that are looking at, port infrastructure and materials, at scale, and energy solutions and clean energy solutions at scale. I think those entrepreneurs should be looking at China and to some extent Germany, countries like that have had, Germany has a model of a sort of more Mittelstand, smaller scale, high-end manufacturing. China has gotten large scale manufacturing at scale, driving costs down. I think the Indian model will be a little bit different. I think that perhaps the Chinese business model has been very much investment and export led, with huge savings base. India still imports capital to some extent, and it's a slightly different dynamic. It is consumer led, which is the exciting thing about India. But you could definitely take lessons from countries that have been able to put, to your earlier question, large scale manufacturing in place at the right price point.
Specifically with regards to banking, what you've seen in some of these other markets that can be applied here in India?
Banking is so interesting because actually a lot of the innovations often have been in more newer economies. Sometimes the older economies, people are used to writing checks, and it took us years to stop people writing checks. I had an event during the United Nations General Assembly week, and I did a private thing, and this lady, and she goes, "Oh, can you send me a check?" And I had to find a check to put in the post. But in some of the newer economies, places like China, everything is digital. And that reduces the cost of transactions, and there's a lot of other benefits. So I actually think in financial services, there's many ways in which India could leap forward. Now, in the savings space, and Nandan touched on this earlier, in terms of savings products, investment products that allow a democratization of that, where people can gather their savings, first of all, get it out of the mattress, as it were, get it into the banking system, and then with UPI, et cetera, that's fine. And then gathering those savings and then putting it in the markets. There's a lot of innovations around that, and I know there's specific, I don't call it projects, innovations, joint ventures that people are thinking through to make that happen. And that's super powerful because as India grows, it'll need savings, and ideally you want to grow with domestic savings. At the moment, India is growing with some imported savings, but I think if you could gather all of these savings, have the right balance from gold to other types of savings, I think that will help with the growth trajectory.
So in terms of financial innovation, it's exports, not imports. I mean, exporting out of India, all these technologies, not really, because what you're saying is that India seems to be ahead in many ways.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the use case for the Indian consumer in consumer banking could be ahead of some of the older economies.
Absolutely.
Because it's a bit like digital. They didn't need to go through the copper wires to get to digital. They're coming new to banking services. So they're not wedded to writing a check, for example. So it's not necessarily exporting, it's just adopting it so much faster. You know, one of the first sort of digital banking areas was something called M-Pesa, which came out of Kenya, actually, in East Africa. And it probably, I'm not an expert on it, I'm sure there might be a business school business review on it, but it probably was born out of a need with the other infrastructure not being there. So in that case, I think the Indian consumer can leapfrog. But there are other areas of financial services where definitely a lot of innovation can come in.
Now then you spoke about education, agriculture, healthcare, right? These are the three
And
things.
language.
And language.
See, the language is huge.
Right.
The Indians speak 22 official languages and several hundred languages and dialects. So if you can use AI to improve the ability of two Indians to communicate, that will improve productivity.
What about financial services, what Bernie was sort of talking about?
No, I think on the consumer side, retail, all that, I think India is in a good place. But the West has very sophisticated financial products. So we don't have those kind of things. So I think there's a lot to learn on securitization and different kinds of transactions.
On the corporate side, on the retail side?
Retail, I think it's in a good place.
So we've spoken about education, agriculture, health, financial services. Let's talk about sort of the other big thing, which is climate. And as India goes through this industrialization process and growth over many years, how do we protect climate as well? Nandan, I just wanted your thoughts first up on this.
Well, I think there is a lot happening in terms of the energy transition. We are seeing a huge amount of investment in wind and solar in India, both at the grid level, but equally interestingly at the retail level. And the government, for example, has a initiative for every home to put rooftop solar and give some incentives for doing that. But this will require the grid to be far more sophisticated. It requires the ability to manage millions of energy producing points. So I think there's a whole software thing which is there. And fortunately, we are doing something in India with something called the Unified Energy Interface, which is like a protocol, like ONDC for commerce. It's for energy. And I think those kind of things are very important. At the same time, we must recognize that coal will be part of our mix for a long time. And also, coal is a big job creator in central India. You go to Dhanbad and Jharkhand and so on. So that transition in a just way will also be very important.
Bernie, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think the just transition is so important within India and around the world. There are many communities that did not pollute at all. And when we say, well, there's a very high cost of energy because of that, it doesn't seem very fair. And yes, absolutely, as India goes through its growth, we've seen in other countries where the environment wasn't protected because growth was the most important thing. And they've ended up with polluted rivers and, mountains, large amounts of earth moved. And so getting that balance right is really so important. But some of the innovations, and actually coming back to AI, some of the technologies, and come back to financial innovation, some of the financial innovation capital markets that can crowd all of this in, could end up with lower energy input costs, and sustainable over the long period of time. So if you do have progress and India ends up with that, then that's really a double benefit, because the energy, if India is going to go into a more high manufacturing phase in its economy, as you suggested earlier. High manufacturing tends to have more energy as a higher input cost versus services, for example. And so getting that at a good price point is important.
I think that brings us to the end of our conversation. Gentlemen, Bernie, Nandan, great sitting down and having this really enlightening chat. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Presented by Bank of America, the Leadership Series, Transforming India, in association with CNBC TV 18.